Bonjour tout le monde, quelle belle journée aujourd'hui. À la fin de la dernière élection, les Canadiens nous ont donné un mandat clair pour en finir avec la pandémie et avancer sur les priorités de tous les Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays. Et derrière moi, je suis énormément content aujourd'hui de vous présenter l'équipe pour faire ce travail. Merci mes amis. We have a team of familiar faces and new faces that are ready to put all their strengths, all their hard work towards delivering for Canadians in the coming years, continue to deliver on real change. There's a few things we know are top of mind for Canadians. First of all, ending the pandemic for good. Canada, as we all know, is a world leader on vaccination rates, but we're not out of this yet. We need to continue to remain vigilant, continue to support people struggling in places across the country, and continue to deliver on the priorities we laid out a few weeks ago on ending this pandemic. Whether it's vaccination mandates for federal public servants, whether it's moving forward to make sure that anyone getting on a plane or a train is fully vaccinated, we've moved forward on those. We continue to move forward with the provinces and territories on rolling out and paying for proof of vaccination certificates for both domestic use in the provinces, but internationally as well. And we're also going to be moving forward with legislation to better protect healthcare workers from harassment and intimidation on their way into work. Il faut garder les familles en sécurité et éviter les confinements, pas juste pour la santé mentale, pas juste pour la santé physique, mais aussi pour la reprise économique. Et ça, c'est l'autre grande priorité à laquelle les Canadiens s'attendent, qu'on s'attarde, de rebâtir une économie forte qui travaille pour tout le monde, qui sera inclusive, qui répondra aux défis de la relance avec de l'imagination, de la créativité, mais surtout de l'appui pour les industries, pour les gens qui vont créer des carrières pour l'avenir. C'est pour ça que nous sommes là pour continuer à appuyer les industries, les secteurs et les travailleurs qui sont durement frappés par la pandémie, tout en encourageant la relance dans les autres secteurs. We are there and continuing with a straightforward promise we made to Canadians many, many months ago, that we would have your backs as long as it took, as much as it took. And while we are still there to support the hard-hit industries from this pandemic and workers in those hard-hit lockdown areas, we know that part of having people's backs is making sure our economy keeps growing. We've had good numbers already. We committed to 1 million new jobs back in the last throne speech over a year ago. We've delivered on that. We're now recovered 100% of the jobs we lost during this pandemic. The U.S. has only recovered about 3/4 of the jobs lost during the pandemic. But we know there's more to do. From tackling the housing crisis, making sure that affordability remains top of mind for everyone working to serve Canadians, and continuing to move forward on historic childcare agreements to bring families $10 a day childcare right across the country. We still have work to do in New Brunswick, Alberta, and Ontario, as well as Northwest Territories and Nunavut, but I know we're going to get it done because families deserve that support. The same focus and urgency we brought to the fight against COVID, we have to bring to the other enormous crisis Canada and the world is facing, and it's climate change. We know that fighting against climate change and preventing biodiversity loss are key for Canadians and for people around the world. That's what we're going to continue doing here at home while we head to Glasgow and encourage and challenge the world to do even more, go even faster, as Canada has. Il faut s'assurer que l'industrie pétrolière et gazière arrête d'augmenter ses émissions et commence à les réduire, tout en étant là pour appuyer les travailleurs dans ces industries-là à se trouver de nouvelles façons de travailler, des nouveaux emplois et des nouvelles carrières pour eux, pour leurs familles, pour leur communauté. On va être là pour cette transition que nous amène la planète. On va continuer d'être là pour les gens. While we move forward on building a stronger economy, while we move forward on fighting climate change, we need to include reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in every job we take, in every step of the way. Last week, I visited the Kamloops Tesowetbuk, and it was an extraordinary moment to hear from them, to talk about the path forward, and to recommit ourselves to doing even more. We've done a lot, but there's so much more work to be done. We've lifted close to 120 long-term boil water advisories over the past years. We've built or renovated close to 200 schools. We've passed historic legislation like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People to move forward in partnership. But we all know, and this entire team is committed to doing even more, even faster in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Nous allons continuer de faire le travail pour livrer, pour la classe moyenne, pour les familles, pour les aînés, pour les jeunes. Nous avons besoin de bâtir un Canada plus juste, plus vert, plus prospère. C'est exactement ce que nous allons faire en équipe. We have a solid team with experience, commitment, passion to serve this country. I can't wait to keep moving forward with them for everyone. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Merci beaucoup. Le Premier ministre va prendre 20 minutes de questions. Les ministres vont rester disponibles pour répondre à d'autres questions par la suite. The PM will be taking 20 minutes of question. Minister will remain available for more questions after, starting with Mic 1 with Ashley Berg from CBC.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. What message do you want to send to Canada's energy sector and the appointment of Stephen Gilbeau as Environment Minister when he's built his past career around opposing pipelines and the oil and gas sector developments?
There is not much of a debate anymore about whether or not climate change is real. There are some corners of the public sphere where you still see that debate, but for most Canadians, and indeed most Albertans, we know that we need to look towards the future. We need to bring people along, support them in the jobs they need to have, but also lower our emissions so we get to net zero. Indeed, the largest energy companies in this country are committed to net zero by 2050. And the way to do that is to all of us work together. We have a number of strong ministers, including Minister Gilbeau, Minister Wilkinson, and others, dedicated to the fight against climate change and dedicated to making sure that all Canadians have a brighter future because of it. We will be committed to working with Albertans, to working with people in the energy sector across the country as we build the kind of future everyone wants for their kids and grandkids, with both good jobs, prosperity, and cleaner air and fresh water. This is something we're committed to as a country, something future generations are demanding of us right now, and something we will continue to tackle with extreme and extraordinary ambition.
What specifically do you expect from Anita Anand in her new role as Defence Minister? Why make this change to this portfolio? And as well, what changes will you make to ensure that she succeeds in the tasks that you've given her?
I think one of the things Canadians have seen over the past year and a half is, as Minister of Vaccines, Public Service and Procurement, Minister Anand has been extraordinarily effective at supporting Canadians through a very difficult time. That's part of the job of the Canadian Armed Forces, to be there to support Canadians through difficult times, whether it be floods, whether it be international conflicts. We have seen the Canadian Armed Forces step up time and time again to save lives, to defend our values, to defend our priorities. At the same time, we know there is a crisis within the culture in our Canadian Armed Forces, and the women and men who serve in the Armed Forces deserve better support, deserve a shift in the kind of governance that they have. And one of the things that people will be learning about Anita Anand in the coming months is that she is a world-class expert in governance with decades of professional experience that she will bring to bear to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces, the leadership and the operations thereof, are worthy of the extraordinary women and men who choose to serve in our armed forces.
Prochaine question, micro 2.
Oui, bonjour, Lina Dib, la presse canadienne. Vous avez nommé un Québécois à la santé. Vous savez ce que Québec et M. Legault pensent des ingérences dans ce domaine. Alors, je veux savoir, c'est quoi exactement le message que vous envoyez à M. Legault en nommant M. Duclos dans ce poste?
Moi, j'ai entendu très clairement des Québécois et de tous les Canadiens ce qu'ils veulent de leur système de santé, ce qu'ils veulent de leur gouvernement pluriel. Ils veulent des systèmes qui fonctionnent. Ils veulent des résultats. Ils veulent plus d'appui en santé mentale. Ils veulent plus d'accès à des médecins de famille. Ils veulent qu'on en finisse avec les délais. Notre approche va être très simple et très directe. Nous savons que ça prend plus d'investissement en santé à travers le pays, mais nous allons nous assurer que ça livre des résultats pour les Canadiens à travers le pays, incluant les Québécois. J'ai bien hâte d'entamer des discussions sur cela avec les provinces. Comme les gens ont vu, on a été là pour investir des milliards de dollars pour appuyer les systèmes de santé pendant la pandémie. Nous allons être là pour bâtir un système de santé, des systèmes de santé plus forts à travers le pays. Nous allons le faire en partenariat, en gardant au cœur de tout ce qu'on est en train de faire les résultats que les Canadiens méritent de recevoir.
Monsieur Trudeau, vous ne me répondez pas, mais pas du tout. Vous ne me dites pas qu'est-ce que ça signifie de nommer un Québécois, là. Est-ce que vous attendez à une lutte avec Québec? Est-ce que M. Duclos est la personne pour faire cette lutte-là avec M. Legault?
Je pense que ce serait une erreur, Lina, de penser que seulement les Québécois se préoccupent de notre système de santé. Nous avons des Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays qui sont préoccupés par ce qui se passe dans notre système de santé. Et j'ai choisi une personne extraordinaire qui a fait ses preuves à bien des niveaux, au Conseil du Trésor, pour les familles et les communautés, et dans sa carrière d'économiste à Laval, à l'Université Laval, qui a démontré sa capacité de résoudre des problèmes et de livrer pour les gens. Alors, j'ai très hâte de le voir en communication, pas seulement avec le gouvernement du Québec, mais le gouvernement de l'Ontario, le gouvernement de la Colombie-Britannique, des gouvernements à travers le pays. Nous sommes un gouvernement fédéral et je sais que de mettre les bonnes personnes à la bonne place, incluant Jean-Yves Duclos au ministère de la Santé, ça va faire la bonne différence dans la vie des Canadiens.
Merci. Mike 1, next question.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister David Baxter with Global News. What sort of specific direction will you be giving Minister Anand in crafting and implementing an independent mechanism to report military sexual misconduct?
Well, I want to highlight, first of all, that over the past years, even though there have been real challenges in shifting the culture at the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, Minister Sajjan has consistently been someone who has been there to fight for the women and men who serve in our armed forces and to push back against the culture that excludes and that marginalizes people. And I thank him for his leadership and his service there. And I'm excited about seeing the next steps that will be brought forward by Minister Anand. As you know, there are already a number of processes in place from General Carignan heading up a specific unit in the armed forces to draw together all concerns and resources, to Madame Arbour, who will be delivering a landmark report with the next steps on how we truly transform the culture of the military in deep and significant ways. There have been a number of changes made over the years. None of it has been sufficient. None of it has been worthy of the extraordinary men and women who serve in our armed forces. And that's why we're going to continue to do the necessary work to make sure that our armed forces are not only capable of continuing to step up and deliver for Canadians, but they're also going to be protecting all of those members within the armed forces from discrimination or harassment.
And now that the new cabinet has been sworn in, when will you decide whether or not Admiral R. MacDonald will return to his responsibilities as Chief of the Defence Staff?
In the decisions we make around leadership in the armed forces, every step of the way, we will be placing survivors and the women and men who serve in the armed forces at the center of all those decisions, and that decision is currently underway.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine
Bonjour,
question.
Raymond Filion de TVA. Monsieur Trudeau, pourquoi avoir exclu Marc Garneau de votre cabinet?
Je veux d'abord remercier Marc pour ses années de service en politique, en tant que ministre des Transports, en tant que ministre des Affaires étrangères, mais aussi pour son service remarquable tout au long de sa carrière, que ce soit dans les forces armées, que ce soit évidemment comme astronaute, comme scientifique. Nous avons tous bénéficié du travail et du service de M. Garneau. Il va continuer de représenter ses commettants. Il va continuer de faire partie de notre équipe aussi longtemps qu'on pourra l'avoir. En même temps, je veux souligner à quel point je suis content de pouvoir présenter une équipe renouvelée de gens, de nouvelles faces, de nouveaux visages qui font partie de notre cabinet, qui vont pouvoir contribuer énormément aux prochains défis auxquels on fait face en tant que pays. C'est jamais facile d'assembler le bon cabinet pour les moments, mais je trouve que l'équipe avec laquelle je suis entouré aujourd'hui est la bonne pour la situation et pour les années à venir.
Garneau aura un autre poste, ambassadeur par exemple. Et qu'est-ce que ça dit? Vous en êtes maintenant à votre 5e ministre des Affaires étrangères en 6 ans. Qu'est-ce que ça envoie comme message aux alliés du Canada?
Je pense que les gens à l'international voient très bien à quel point le Canada continue de s'impliquer dans le multilatéralisme, dans les grands enjeux, que ce soit la lutte contre les changements climatiques ou de tenir tête contre l'autoritarisme et les défis qu'on est en train de vivre envers nos démocraties un peu partout dans le monde. Nous allons continuer d'être un partenaire ferme et présent et j'ai très hâte de pouvoir travailler avec la ministre Joly sur l'échiquier international pour continuer d'avancer les priorités des Canadiens.
Merci. Prochaine question. Mike 1.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Jeff Pelletier from Nunatsiaq News. Over the weekend in Baker Lake, Nunavut, residents were protesting the closure of an elder care home. And there's also a petition going around calling for elder care services in every community in Nunavut. What will your government do to ensure that elders in Nunavut have that care so that they don't have to fly south here to Ottawa for care?
I recently, just a few days ago, had a conversation with Premier Savikatak of Nunavut to talk about the work that we need to continue doing together. He certainly brought up the challenges faced by elders and others in the community, and we will continue to be there as a partner on both urgent issues like the water issue faced by Iqaluit over the past week, but also with investments in infrastructure, in housing, in support for vulnerable seniors right across the territory and indeed across the country.
And where does this priority lie for your new Minister of Seniors?
I'm very pleased to have our youngest member of Cabinet, Kamal Khera, be the Minister for Seniors. She will bring to it both her experience, her passion for serving, for caring for others that she's always brought as a nurse and a parliamentarian, and make sure that seniors from coast to coast to coast are well protected. I can also say that our Minister for the North, Dan Vandal, will be there as he continues to look for greater investments, greater supports for seniors and for everyone. Minister Vandal has been a long time active member of our team in the North and will now have extra responsibilities for the Northern Development Agency that will allow him to do even more for vulnerable populations in the North.
Next question, Mike 2.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. On the First Nations child welfare case, will you be appealing the federal court decision forcing the federal government to pay for the harms done to First Nations children and their families?
This is an extremely important issue and an extremely difficult one as well. We are committed as a government to reconciliation, and that means we are committed to compensating Indigenous children, now adults, who were harmed by Child and Family Services. That is what we've been consistent on since the very beginning. We are also committed to ending the system of Child and Family Services that continues to remove kids from their communities, to give them unacceptable barriers, outcomes, and situations that no Canadian child should have to face. I am working extremely closely with the impacted ministers. We're reaching out to others. We are looking very, very carefully at what the right path is forward to ensure that, yes, we can compensate people who've been harmed in the past, but that we also have the ability to put an end to the ongoing harms that are continuing to happen in Child and Family Services across the country. Getting that balance right is at the heart of the path forward on reconciliation and the decision that we will be taking in the coming days on the path forward on the CHRT ruling.
With the respect, it's a fairly simple question. Will you be appealing, yes or no? I'm going to point out you did not answer that. However, I will move on. Do you intend on leading the Liberal Party into the next election?
Yes.
Next question, Mike 1. Next question, Mike 1.
Hi, Prime Minister. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. Why make such a big overhaul to your cabinet when the election delivered nearly identical results for you? Were you unhappy with the job it was doing?
On the contrary, I think one of the things we saw very clearly in this election was that Canadians are expecting big things to be done by Parliament and by this government. Whether it's continuing to step up even more and faster on the fight against climate change, whether it's moving forward in even more concrete and tangible ways on the path of reconciliation, or whether it's looking at what it really means to build back better and ensure that as we grow our economy, everyone gets included. These are no small tasks. These are the things that Canadians expect us to do, and with a refreshed and reinvigorated team around me, I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to accomplish for Canadians, and I know that this team is raring to go.
Why is Minister Sajjan still part of your cabinet when there are others who lost their posts, when it was his handling of sexual misconduct in the military that was roundly criticized as being inadequate?
Minister Sajjan has fought all his life for Canadian values, for Canadian opportunities, and for fairness and equity. As someone who rose through the ranks of a challenging culture in our military and has consistently pushed back against the Old Boys Network, I don't think anyone can be surprised at the kind of pushback he saw as he was trying to bring about changes over the past number of years. His passion to share Canadian values, not just through the work of the military, but around the world, will be exceedingly useful for Canada and our impact in the world as Minister of International Development. And I'm very excited to see him continue to build on the great relationships he's had around the world in getting things done for vulnerable populations and stepping up for women and girls in this new role. I'm also very excited about him taking the helm of the brand new Pacific Economic Development Agency. We've set up a standalone agency to support economic development and small businesses in British Columbia. And under Minister Sajjan's leadership, I know it's going to create tremendous opportunities for everyone in British Columbia.
Prochaine question, micro 2.
Bonjour, Juliane Lapointe de Radio-Canada. Monsieur Trudeau, c'est la deuxième fois que vous présentez un Conseil des ministres dans un contexte minoritaire. Qu'est-ce qui va être différent cette fois-ci avec l'équipe que vous avez bâtie?
Je pense que les Canadiens s'attendent à ce que ce Parlement travaille ensemble, mais les Canadiens s'attendent aussi qu'on livre de grandes choses. C'est exactement ce que cette équipe va pouvoir livrer avec de la passion, de l'expertise dans bien des domaines, avec l'expérience de plusieurs années de service, avec un souffle de vent nouveau pour nos nouveaux arrivés. Nous allons pouvoir travailler avec tous les parlementaires pour livrer de façon concrète sur les priorités, que ce soit d'en finir avec la pandémie, de lutter contre les changements climatiques, de travailler sur la réconciliation et surtout pour rebâtir une économie plus forte pour tout le monde. C'est l'équipe pour le faire.
Vous avez dit vouloir travailler plus vite, aller plus vite. Comment c'est justifié alors de retourner au Parlement 2 mois après les élections?
Je pense que ce que les gens ont vu sur les mandats de vaccination dans la fonction publique fédérale, que ce soit pour les trains, les avions, que ce soit pour les certificats de vaccination, que ce soit pour de l'aide aux citoyens ou des investissements pour continuer la relance économique, nous avons fait énormément de travail déjà et nous allons continuer de le faire. Le Parlement a des grandes priorités sur lesquelles nous allons livrer le mois prochain et je sais que nous avons tous très hâte de s'y mettre.
We'll take one last question at mic 1.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. Mina Karaman-Williams, the Globe and Mail. 3 of your previous cabinet ministers are not here this time around. Could you explain why you demoted Bardish Chagger, Jim Carr, and Mark Garneau from cabinet? If you could comment on each specific case, please.
I think everyone knows that cabinet making requires difficult choices. Bringing forward people who've served, giving new challenges to folks who haven't, and looking at the right balance of regional diversity, experiences to deliver. And what I have right now as an extraordinary team that is reinvigorated, that is ready to step up and fight for the big things for Canadians is a team that I'm very, very much looking forward to working with.
Will any of them be given a new assignment outside of cabinet? For instance, there's speculation that maybe an ambassador position is a possibility. Is anything like that under consideration?
I'm incredibly pleased to be here today to present the team that is going to deliver on big priorities for Canadians over the coming years, whether it's fighting against climate change, whether it's moving forward on reconciliation even faster, whether it's building an economy that works for everyone while we end with this pandemic once and for all. This team we're announcing today is the team to do that. There will be, of course, plenty more announcements that we'll be making over the coming weeks and months about other things we'll be doing, about other ways we'll be tackling big challenges and other people to do that. Today, this cabinet is the news of the day.
Thank you. This is what ends the press conference for the Prime Minister.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Bonne journée.
All right, starting with mic 2, first question.
Hi, Ministers. Chris Ryan, CBC. My first question is for Minister Miller, and then my second question will be for Mr. Vandal. Mr. Miller, you are going to be dealing directly with residential school survivors from St. Anne's. Will you meet with these survivors to discuss a settlement? Will you open all databases, including the Indian Register, to track the children who never came home? And you're taking over an office that's being described as toxic. How do you plan to make changes?
How much time do I have to answer that question, Chris?
We have 10 minutes, I'm told.
They didn't ask me to rag the puck, but these are very important questions, and I'll absolutely meet with survivors. I spent a good chunk of the summer visiting residential schools, meeting with elders, and visiting sites. Every site is different, and each has a unique, horrifying story to it. It's important to note in the St. Anne's context that the vast majority of survivors have received compensation to the extent monetary compensation can replace harm past and the horrific harm that occurred. There are a number of nuances with respect to the information. Those are ones that are being reviewed judicially. If there's more to uncover, I'm glad to get under that and start working on it. The issue with respect to who holds files evidence that needs to be preserved and, if appropriate, disclosed to the public. And let's not shy away from the fact that these are horrifying accounts of schools that were, of institutions, of labor camps that were designed to rid the indigenousness of people, but they do document some horrifying incidents. So there are privacy concerns, and we should not shy away from being quite open about that fact. If there isn't anything that the federal government is holding, I'm willing to work with my department to get to the bottom of that. I'm sure Minister Haidu will say exactly the same thing. This is making sure that we continue on the path and getting more clarity and closure for survivors, some of whom continue to courageously speak out, and frankly, some of whom continue to suffer in silence. These are not uncomplex matters, but they are matters that we need to get to the bottom of it for the sake of who we are as a country, but also foremost for the sake of those who are still suffering. As regards the department, I've spent the last 2 years as a minister, most of which is during a pandemic, working with a team pretty much around the clock. That when you look at the entirety of the civil service that has supported Indigenous Services Canada, one that has historically had a bad reputation. There are instances, like many other institutions, where there is systemic racism. I've gotten a tremendous amount of guidance from my staff that is Indigenous. A good chunk of it has guided me along this path and saved my skin a number of times. And I prize that feedback that I get. Workplaces can get toxic, particularly with respect to issues that are very, very painful. There's a lot of people that are Indigenous that go to work at Indigenous Services Canada or at Crown Indigenous Relations and are looked at differently by members of their community, but they're doing that to change the reality of their people that has far too long been denied and treated miserably. So that workplace and understanding that the civil service is independent and needs to be treated as such as a matter of good governance, these are things that we have to work with our deputy ministers, whether it's Deputy Minister Kwan Watson or Deputy Minister Fox. It's something that they are laser focused on because they know it is a problem and they need to rid it from all parts of the civil service, but particularly in those ones that are the emblems of reconciliation.
Appreciate the detailed answer. Thanks very much. Mr. Vandal, this question's from CBC Iqaluit. The City of Iqaluit recently submitted an application to the Government of Canada to fix its ongoing water issues and sustain its water supply for the future. The price tag is about $180 million, and just wondering if you've received that, would move forward with that, and are you aware that there are water issues in Grise Fjord and many other communities throughout the territory?
Yes, first of all, I've had conversations with the City of Iqaluit on my visits pre-COVID about a new water source for the city. I know we are fully seized with the issue. The Canadian Armed Forces is there now to do all things possible to help. I've approved a temporary water license as of about 10 days ago to draw water from a local river, and I know we are communicating directly with the government of Nunavut and the City of Iqaluit on that issue. A long-term solution is infrastructure-based. We have Canada's largest infrastructure program in history, and I'm looking forward to working with the city, the territory, and the infrastructure minister to arrive at a long-term solution.
Mike 1.
Hi there, Mackenzie Gray from CTV. Ms. Freeland, my first question is for you. Your government has racked up a decent amount of spending during the pandemic, and there's a number of large programs that your government looked to bring forward in this mandate. Is there any consideration to raising revenue by either increasing the GST or increasing income tax for regular Canadians?
Thanks for the question. Nice to see you. And let me just start by pointing out that we are very mindful, and we're mindful from the outset of the pandemic, that this was an extraordinary situation. It was a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. It provoked the greatest depression since the Great Depression in Canada. And we understood, the Prime Minister understood from the outset, that that crisis required extraordinary government action. And I am really glad that we put in place the support which we put in place for individual Canadians, for Canadian businesses, and also that we went out and aggressively bought vaccines. We are, though, very much aware And we were aware from the beginning of the pandemic that our emergency support programs were precisely that, emergency support programs. And as we are finishing the fight against COVID and winning the fight against COVID, we understood from the beginning that that would be the moment to pivot to a new, and I really hope and believe, final stage of support. And that's what the Prime Minister and I announced last week. And part of what we're doing is understanding that we need to be thoughtful and careful about managing government finances. During the campaign, we put forward a carefully costed program. We put forward detailed 5-year spending plans. In those plans, we showed a continued decline in the debt to GDP ratio. And we did put forward some specific plans to raise additional revenue. Those plans did not include what you just alluded to.
My second question is for Minister Gilbeau. Thank you, Ms. Freeland, for that answer. Mr. Gilbeau, you've been a long-time climate activist, and I'm sure you're very excited to be Environment Minister. Do you think the government needs to change their plans in any way to make sure that Canada meets their Paris and other emissions targets?
Thank you very much for the question. As you've seen from our platforms, and as we've heard, all of us throughout this last campaign, many Canadians recognize that our government has been doing a lot more in the fight against climate change than any other government before. But they're also telling us we need to do more. They want us to do more. They want us to go faster. And we need to do that by working together all across the country. Climate change affects us all from coast to coast to coast. And we've seen last summer, certainly in Canada, but not just in Canada, how the impacts of climate change are becoming more and more important as years go by. So we've made a number of ambitious new commitments in our platform, namely to cap emissions from oil and gas sector at current level and then diminishing over time so that we reach net zero by 2050, and also to phase out 2 years before our G20 country partners fossil fuel subsidies. So the G20 commitment is to phase them out by 2025. We've committed to do that by 2023. So we will be continuing and accelerating in the fight against climate change. Thank you.
Mike 2, last question.
Hi, my question and follow-up are for Minister Mark Miller. My first question is, you're entering a department where a lot of files have been languishing for some time. You're going to be dealing with a lack of trust among First Nations, treaty rights, self-government agreements, land claims, lawsuits, specific claims. The list kind of goes on. So I'd like to ask you, what is your #1 priority going into that department?
Well, I think, unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of having just one priority. I think you named ones that are key to the relationship that has been broken since before Canada existed. This relationship started with land. The relationship has been broken because of land theft, and it's time to give land back, and that's just the reality of it. It's easily said. It's more difficultly done. In the last 2 years of my time as a minister, as I mentioned earlier, it's been during a global pandemic where my #1 priority was to keep people and work with communities to keep people safe and alive. The #1 impediment to that wasn't resources, it was trust. And I hope, and I think I'm being probably mildly optimistic, but I think we've built a measure of trust that I think I could take into this department and start moving quickly on things that, one, shouldn't have happened in the first place, and in order to fix them, need to move a whole heck of a lot quicker. Before, when I was parliamentary secretary to Minister Bennett, we settled a land claim in BC that arose during the Depression, and it was the Indian agent that basically stole some trees for a few $1,000s. The claim lasted 100 years. These things can't take 100 years to fix. It cost $500,000 to fix it and to restitute it to the families. It should never happen in the first place. It's a pretty clear and cut case. So there are a lot of things that can be fixed easily. There's a lot more difficult ones that we need to move forward on, whether it's Wet'suwet'en rights, which should have been clear cut from a court decision 20 years ago, or others on this in this neck of the woods. They are not uncomplexed. They do cost money, But the first thing to do is to start building that trust and to start speaking with people, getting our negotiators back at the negotiating table and talking with good minds. And that is first and foremost lands, but includes a lot of other specific claims that I'm eager to move forward, but needs the support of all Canadians to make sure that moves forward and how we see our country going into the future.
For that answer, as a follow-up, what do you make of Minister Bennett being shuffled out of that role after 6 years, and how is your approach going to differ from your predecessors?
Well, I think you'll have to draw your own conclusion as to how that differs. I wouldn't be the person I am today without the support and encouragement of Minister Bennett. She has my first position, Minister of Indigenous Services, in the beginning of a global pandemic. And so I've leaned on her a lot, and she's selflessly offered her time, support, encouragement, and she's pushed me at times to be better. Some of the work that we've done in and around making sure that we recognize Joyce's principle, for example, while it fell within my department to push it and to put out a number of summits with stakeholders to change something about how the healthcare system treats Indigenous peoples, was because she pushed our department, pushed us, and we pushed ourselves. Again, I'm coming out of this as having worked with a team pretty much around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think they've proven their mettle, and hopefully we can take some of that momentum into the next job.
My apologies. We'll take one last question, one follow-up for French, please.
Sure. Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press, for Minister Vandal. Congrats on your reappointment. But I do have to ask, this is the first time in decades that Manitoba hasn't had anyone on the front bench. I'm wondering how come neither you nor your colleagues in Manitoba or Alberta have a senior cabinet role here, and does this not send a message that the prairies don't matter to this government?
I think nothing can be further from the truth. First of all, I'm very proud of our Manitoba caucus, all four of us. I'm proud to come back as Minister of Northern Affairs with the added responsibility of CanNor, the economic development arm for the North and the Arctic. And I'm also very proud to be the Minister for the economic development strategy for the prairies. And I think for the first time, the economic development strategy for the prairies, which we've worked a long time to achieve, is going to be centered in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Oui, Marco Belair-Cirneau du Devoir. Ma question s'adresse au nouveau ministre de l'Environnement et de la lutte contre le changement climatique. Monsieur Gilbeau, vous savez que la désignation d'un écologiste qui a milité pour Greenpeace, Équiterre, a suscité et suscite beaucoup d'attentes, notamment chez les environnementalistes québécois qui vous connaissent. Est-ce que vous êtes condamné à décevoir les attentes malgré toute votre bonne foi?
Écoutez, l'histoire nous le dira. Je pense que mon rôle et notre rôle en tant que gouvernement, c'est de faire tout ce qu'on peut pour accélérer la lutte au changement climatique, pour accélérer ou freiner, si vous préférez, la disparition des espaces verts et les menaces qui pèsent sur nos espaces naturels et sur les espèces menacées. Je pense que le défi des changements climatiques et celui de la perte de la biodiversité sont les deux grandes crises environnementales qui sont devant nous. Nous avons une plateforme, nous avons fait déjà beaucoup de choses. Le Fonds monétaire international, par exemple, reconnaît que le système de tarification du carbone canadien est l'un des meilleurs et que si l'ensemble des pays du G20 mettaient en place ce pays-là, nous serions à 2/3 de l'atteinte des objectifs de Paris, par exemple. Donc, nous avons déjà fait beaucoup de choses. Nous avons pris des engagements ambitieux dans la dernière plateforme. Notre plateforme a été saluée par un ensemble d'experts d'un bout à l'autre du pays, dont plusieurs collaborateurs du GIEC. Mais je pense que je ne suis pas en mesure de vous dire quel sera le bilan, mais je pense que nous allons faire, en tant que gouvernement, tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour accélérer la mise en place de ces mesures pour faire du Canada un pays, un des meilleurs pays au monde dans le cadre de la lutte au changement climatique et de la protection de la biodiversité. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. C'est tout le temps qu'on a pour le groupe 1. Vous pouvez maintenant ramener. On va ramener le groupe 2. Merci. Merci. Oui. On va maintenant commencer avec les premières questions au micro 1.
Oui, ma question s'adresse à la ministre Petitpas Taylor. Bonjour, Madame la ministre. Je Je me demandais, est-ce que votre réforme de la loi sur les langues officielles allait être un copier-coller de celle de votre prédécesseur, Mélanie Joly? Et appuyez-vous le projet de loi 96 du gouvernement du Québec qui est débattu présentement à l'Assemblée nationale?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Premièrement, c'est un énorme honneur pour moi d'avoir été appelée la ministre des langues officielles, ainsi que pour l'Agence du développement économique de l'APK. C'est sûr qu'aujourd'hui, ma première tâche va être de m'assurer que je vais rencontrer les sous-ministres pour avoir une mise à jour des dossiers. Pour nous, c'est sûr que la priorité absolue va être de déposer le projet de loi d'ici 100 jours, une promesse que nous avons faite, puis une promesse que nous allons accomplir. Merci.
We'll now go to Mike 2.
Hi, my name is Jenna Kokula with the Wire Report. I have a question for Minister Rodriguez. I was just wondering, will you keep in the social media obligations the previous Heritage Committee put in place for sites like YouTube, or will you exempt social media from the upcoming revised Broadcasting Act, or will you put more harsh restrictions on?
Well, you're talking about the Broadcasting Act, which is a very, very important bill. I had the chance to work on this file before. And as you know, we made many promises to table important bills in the 100 first days, and that includes the broadcasting bill. And we need that bill. We have to modernize it. It's been there. It predates the internet. So we have to modernize it. We have to make sure that whoever benefits from the system, whoever participates in our system will contribute to our system. But at the same time, we also know that freedom of expression is a pillar of our democracy in our country. So we'll be working with that.
Time for you to draft the bill. Will you be keeping or removing the previous social media obligations that were in the last one?
What I'm saying is that what we're basing ourselves on is exactly those pillars, which are supporting our artists, our creators, making sure that everybody has the same rules, that those web giants contribute to our culture. That's absolutely fundamental. But again, freedom of expression is also essential. So we'll be working with those parameters.
Merci. Micro 1.
Bonjour, Boris Proulx du Devoir, toujours pour vous, Monsieur Rodriguez. Vous avez promis dans les 100 premiers jours des projets de loi en matière de patrimoine C10 de nouveau, le partage des revenus des médias, les discours haineux. C'est un court délai de temps que nous avons devant nous et je ne sais pas s'il y a quelque chose qui vous fait dire que les conservateurs ou qu'il y aura moins d'obstruction, en tout cas au Parlement. Pourquoi vous allez réussir là où ça n'a pas réussi, disons, la dernière session parlementaire à faire passer ces projets de loi?
Ben, j'espère qu'il y aura moins d'obstruction. On sort d'une élection. On sort d'une élection où il y a eu un mandat clair qui est octroyé au gouvernement. On a été très clair dans ce qu'on a dit sur les projets de loi qu'on allait déposer dans les 100 premiers jours, sur le fait qu'on voulait moderniser la loi sur la radiodiffusion qui prédate l'Internet. On doit absolument la changer. Et je compte sur l'appui de mes collègues des autres partis. J'ai, à travers le temps, établi de bonnes relations, notamment en ayant déjà été ministre du patrimoine, en ayant été leader du gouvernement. J'ai de bonnes relations avec les intervenants des différents autres partis. Et j'espère qu'on va pouvoir arriver à un terrain d'entente qui va bénéficier nos créateurs, nos artistes, et qu'on va avoir un système qui va être égal pour tout le monde, et les géants du web vont contribuer. Je l'ai toujours dit, si tu participes au système, ben tu contribues au système.
Merci. Ma question de suivi est pour Mme Anand. En matière de défense, Mme Anand, est-ce que vous sentez que la mission qu'on vous confie est un cadeau empoisonné? Et comment vous serez en mesure, en fait, de résoudre ce défi-là très important?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Premièrement, je voudrais dire quelques mots parce que ça, c'est la première fois que je peux être ici comme ministre de Défense. Premièrement, je suis honorée que le Premier ministre m'ait demandé d'assumer ce rôle. Je veux m'assurer que le ministère de la Défense nationale et les forces armées canadiennes continuent d'être très respectés dans le monde. Ça, c'est très important pour moi. C'est une institution très, très importante dans notre pays. Nos membres des forces armées canadiennes consacrent leur vie à protéger notre pays et nos citoyens, et nous leur devons de veiller à ce qu'ils opèrent dans un environnement sûr et sain. Donc, la question, je pense que ça, c'est une bonne question, bien sûr. Et à ce moment-là, je viens d'être assermentée comme ministre de la Défense nationale. Je n'ai même pas encore été au bureau ni eu de séance d'information. Donc, ce sont toutes des questions auxquelles j'ai hâte de répondre dans les jours à venir. Mais premièrement, je voudrais dire que, comme vous avez vu avec les vaccins, je suis déterminée et je travaille très fort et je suis axée sur les résultats. Donc, ce sont des qualités que je vais apporter à ce dossier. Merci.
Thank you. I'll now go to Mike 2.
Hi, I'm David Reevely from The Logic, and I have actually two questions for Mr. Rodriguez. The first one, I think, could you say clearly whether you're going to rework Bill C-10 to present a different bill to the Commons?
Well, what I'm saying is that we promised to bring some bills very quickly. C-10 is one of them. Why? Because it's fundamental. It predates the internet, and there's different set of rules, right? So one for our own media, and the other one's for the web giants, and we have to have the same set of rules for everyone. Now, I'm going to take a look at that. I'm going to be consulting, but the basis for the bill has to be to make sure that those web giants, they contribute to our culture like our own companies do. And that's fundamental. But at the same time, as I said it before, freedom of speech is fundamental too. So we're working with that.
My second question, your government has been consulting on fairly detailed proposals for addressing online harms, from illegal pornography to promoting hate speech. And the proposals have been roundly condemned, including internationally, as some of the worst ideas plucked from around the world. What are your priorities when it comes to crafting that legislation?
To listen and to consult. That's what I'm going to be doing starting tomorrow. That's what I'm going to be doing.
Will you be reworking those proposals?
I'll be consulting, that's for sure.
Question 1, Mike 1, sorry.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. My first question is for Minister Anand and then Minister Fraser. As Canada's second female defense minister, how do you plan to do things differently? And as well, how do you plan to restore morale and confidence in a national security institution that's been so badly discredited during the sexual misconduct crisis? And by your estimation, what do you think is at the core of that crisis?
Okay, beaucoup de questions là, Ashley. So let me just say that I'm honored that the Prime Minister has asked me to take on this role as a woman, as a visible minority, and as a minister that has led the largest inoculation campaign, or at least the procurement of those vaccines in Canadian history. But I wanted to say that I bring those qualities to bear to this role. And the fact that I'm a woman is, I guess, one aspect of that calculation. But there are other areas of expertise that I will also be imparting to my role, including my expertise in governance and my knowledge of law and process. And those are very important qualities, I think, in any job, but certainly in the task before us at DND. In terms of moving to your next question, I will say that my top priority is to make sure that everyone in the armed forces feels safe and protected, and that they have the supports that they need when they need them, and the structures in place to ensure that justice is served. And that includes ensuring mental health supports that are easily accessible. I want to be clear that our members of the Canadian Armed Forces dedicate their lives to safeguarding our country and our citizens, and we owe it to them to make sure that they operate in a safe and healthy environment. There is no doubt in my mind that this is a task that we can accomplish, but we need to make sure that we are collaborative, we are working together, and we recognize the value and the importance of the Canadian Armed Forces as an institution in this country. Thank you.
And Minister Fraser, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada has apologized to Afghans after inadvertently leaking the names of several hundred people seeking to escape the Taliban, a leak which could compromise their safety. This is not the first time the IRCC's emails have leaked people's identities. What do you think of that, and what are you going to do about it specifically?
Well, look, the starting point when we're dealing with this issue is that we've made a commitment to bring 40,000 refugees from Afghanistan to Canada. Obviously, we have a lengthy history in the country, and we wanted to make sure that we do right by Afghanistan, the Afghanis that we seek to bring here. The processes through which we identify the people to bring to Canada are going to need a lot of work in the days ahead. This has not been a lengthy period of time that the government has been working on this. It's been really a matter of months to make sure that we have a process in place that's going to protect the information of people while we sort of balance that against the need to get people here expeditiously so we can protect their safety is something that I very much look forward to sitting down with the department in the hours ahead to make sure that we start developing that plan right away. Of course, to the extent that there have already been information that's been compromised, it's something that I'm going to look at with the department when I meet with them immediately following this press conference, and I'll look forward to having further, more detailed discussions with you perhaps once I've had that opportunity. Thank you.
We'll take one last question at Mike 2.
Yeah, my question is for Minister Anand. Minister, I'm wondering, I know you've only been in the job for a few hours, but I'm wondering what you make of the current leadership of the military, of the situation with the Chief of Defense Staff. Do you have confidence in the acting chief? How do you feel you're going to resolve this issue?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned, I've just been sworn in as the Minister of National Defense. I haven't been to headquarters, and I haven't had one briefing. I will be starting that work as soon as this press avail is over. These are excellent questions. I look forward to responding to you in a very forthright manner and way in the next few days. But I just want you to have a sense of what my approach will be, and at least that will provide a partial answer to your question at this early juncture. First of all, I want you to know that I'm going to be reviewing everything. I'm going to be reading the past reports regarding misconduct in the armed forces, as well as the recent independent review of the military justice system. I will be asking the department for an analysis of the recommendations that have already been implemented, as well as the ones that have not been. And I also hope to hear from as many of our women and men in uniform as possible, and I plan to be consulting directly with them across the country. Madame Justice Boer is currently working on a comprehensive review of current policies, practices, and cultures in the CAF, as you know. And I want to make sure that when the report is ready, we are ready to act on it swiftly. That said, I think it is important to remember that there is no one magic solution for this issue. There is no one switch that we can turn on to change everything overnight. This is going to take time, and while that may frustrate some, I want to assure everyone that I will put in the necessary work for as long as it takes to get this done. As I have said, I am thorough, I am determined, I am dogged, and I am results-oriented, and I will be dedicating all of my energies towards this task and this position. Thank you.
Minister, just one follow-up. You mentioned, your expertise in law and governance. And those issues, do you think the military justice system should be prosecuting sexual assault cases, or should that be handled by the criminal justice system outside of that?
Well, thank you for that excellent question, and it is certainly a question that I have given much thought to over the last weeks and months. But it would be imprudent for me to opine on that question at the current time, given that I have not met with the department at all, nor any of the staff or my team, or even attended headquarters. So you'll have to give me a little bit of time to get briefed and to ensure that what I say to the Canadian public is in fact what I believe and what is necessary for reform to occur. Thank you.
Thank you, new Minister. This is all for us for Group 2. All right, we'll start at mic 1.
Hi, Minister Bennett. Both of these questions are for you. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You're going to be tasked with creating a new mental health care transfer. Do you think there should be strings attached to this funding, or do you think provinces should be able to spend this money as they see fit to their own systems?
Well, again, firstly, as we gather here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, I wanted to say that all of these kinds of decisions are part of a strategy, and that we will work with the Minister of Health and with the Minister of Finance, but there is a definite understanding by Canadians that when the federal government sends money, that they expect it to be spent on what it was intended for, and that is the only way we're going to build a mental health strategy.
As a follow-up, I'd like to ask you, there were, as you know, calls for you not to remain as Crown Indigenous Affairs Minister. There were issues raised with your handling of the files, the text you sent to Jody Wilson-Raybould earlier. Now that you are in a new post, any reflection, anything you wish you had done differently, any regrets in your old role?
I have to say that I am extraordinarily proud of what we've been able to do as a government on the journey of reconciliation. And from closing gaps to righting wrongs to being able to accelerate the path to self-determination, this has been an extraordinary journey in which the TRC calls to action across all government departments. We've all worked together on that, as well as the inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the National Action Plan. I'm just very proud of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners that have taught us all so much, not only ourselves as government, but all Canadians, and such that the importance of reconciliation coast to coast to coast has never been higher. And we've got tons more work to do, and I will continue in my new portfolio.
Thank you, Mike, too.
Hi, Tessie Sanchi, Hill Times Research. I cover health, so my questions are for Ministers Bennett and Duclos. Ministers, what were you told about the reasons for the division of the health portfolio? And what does that mean for policy files? Aside from mental health and addictions, who's taking the lead on what? Can you give me some idea of that?
Well, thank you very much. And as you did indicate, or at least suggested, this is a great privilege for me to be working with a distinguished doctor and politician like Minister Bennett. I have a lot to learn from her, and we will be working together closely on matters of physical and mental health, because we know obviously there are strong connections between the two, and we look forward to further news on that matter.
Can you tell me anything about the division of policy files? I think possibly people are speculating that, especially with COVID still being such a big situation, maybe one of the ministers is a COVID minister and the other one is looking at other policy files. Any clarification on that?
Well, two things on this. First, there will be mandate letters that will be communicated. As we know, since 2015, these letters are public, which will make things very clear and transparent at the same time. And second, on COVID-19 and other things, mental health and physical health are obviously strongly connected. We've seen the damages and the ruptures, the severe trauma that people live in their physical bodies and in their minds as well, and that's why our close relationship will be so important.
Yes, a lot of people, I think, have seen that mental health has become a parallel pandemic, and that we actually need to really dive in and make sure that there's a mental health strategy across all government departments, but also with the provinces and the territories, and for us to make sure that the stigma is gone, that the idea that mental health is health. And you know, for me, it's something that I think I felt that I was sort of doing off the side of my desk for a very long time, and now we get to really actually make the connection with Canadians that for this area that affects really every single family in this country.
Back to Mike 1.
Good afternoon, David Baxter with Global News. This first question is for Minister LeBlanc. Have Premier Kenney saying that the success of the equalization referendum gives him a clear mandate to open up negotiations with the feds on that file. What's your position on opening up talks with Alberta on equalization?
I think Premier Kenney knows very well that changing the equalization formula is a constitutional conversation. Canadians want their governments to focus collaboratively on working together in the fight against COVID-19. That's something I've had the privilege to do with Mr. Kenney and his government in the past as Intergovernmental Affairs Minister. I look forward to doing that work. The Premier decided to ask a non-binding question on a municipal election in Alberta about an equalization formula of which he was one of the authors when he was a minister in Mr. Harper's government. So I think maybe you should ask him what he thought could be achieved by that particular referendum question.
Thank you. And my second question is for Minister Wilkinson. Your predecessor, Minister Reagan, previously has talked about the move to net zero, not necessarily meaning an end of fossil fuels, looking at more of carbon offsets, things like that as we move forward. Given your previous 10 years as Environment Minister, what's your position on the future of fossil fuels in Canada's energy mix?
Excuse me. So, I am particularly focused, as I was in my previous portfolio, on finding pathways to reduce emissions across all sectors of the economy in a manner that is consistent with the pursuit and the achievement of economic opportunity. And so oil and gas is one of the areas where we clearly need to see significant reductions in the emissions that are associated with that. It's the largest single source of emissions in this country. But there are pathways. There are economic pathways. I came from the clean tech sector. I worked for almost 20 years as a CEO in the clean tech sector working on these issues, and I think that those are the kinds of conversations that we're going to want to have with the energy sector, but also with other sectors across the economy.
Back to Mike 2.
Hi there. My first question is for Minister Bennett. In July, former staffers came forward alleging your office was a toxic workplace and that there were complaints that were ignored or never acted upon. What do you, the new Minister for Mental Health, say to staffers who feel like you might not be the best person to take on this big new role?
I believe that everyone deserves a safe and healthy workplace, and I believe that there are absolutely clear ways of reporting or coming forward with in any situation where somebody doesn't feel safe, and we have those in place. And I think that I have always taken that very seriously, and I am absolutely confident that we can go forward with colleagues going forward across all of government. This is hugely important to our government.
Great. And my next question is for Minister Duclos. You're taking over the health portfolio. Obviously, the last 2 years has really been focused on COVID-19. We're still not out of this pandemic. We're seeing provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta with COVID cases rising, ICU cases rising as well. However, here in Ontario, restrictions are loosened, and by March, they're hoping to have all restrictions completely eased. I'm wondering what your priorities will be in this position, and do you think that we're in a spot in Canada to be fully relaxing our restrictions at this point?
Well, my priorities will be, A, to exit definitively from COVID-19, obviously working in collaboration and in support to provinces and territories. B, to build back better our system, which did have failures before COVID-19, but the failures that we had identified before COVID-19 became even more visible and problematic during COVID-19, then to protect ourselves against the risk of any future or other aspects, other waves of COVID-19 or other pandemics, and then finally working towards a healthcare system that is equitable, efficient in the longer term. And obviously, again, this is involving a strong level of collaboration and success with provinces and territories.
We'll take one last question from Mike 2.
Juliana Point de Radio-Canada. Monsieur Duclos, c'est pour vous, celle-là aussi. Le gouvernement Legault a dit qu'il ne veut pas se faire imposer des conditions dans les transferts en santé. Comment vous voyez votre rôle dans ce contexte-là et quelle approche vous voulez avoir aussi avec le gouvernement Legault?
Bien, mon approche est celle qui a déjà été un peu résumée par le premier ministre un peu plus tôt aujourd'hui. C'est une approche de respect, de collaboration, mais une approche aussi qui met l'accent sur les résultats. Et on partage exactement les mêmes objectifs que ceux que le gouvernement du Québec et d'autres gouvernements des provinces et territoires ont déjà annoncés. Donc, la collaboration, la responsabilité partagée, le respect et un accent sur les résultats parce que nous servons les mêmes personnes, les mêmes citoyens et nous avons aussi les mêmes objectifs.
Peut-être une question pour M. Wilkinson, si vous êtes d'accord. Vous n'êtes plus à l'environnement, mais est-ce que vous prévoyez quand même continuer à jouer un rôle dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques, peut-être en collaboration avec votre collègue Gilbeau, mais aussi peut-être pour rallier les provinces de l'Ouest, les gens qui se retrouvent dans les provinces de l'Ouest qui sont peut-être un peu plus réticents?
Oui, M. Gilbeau et I ont travaillé ensemble durant les 2 ans qui s'est passé. Et bien sûr, à l'avenir, nous allons travailler ensemble, particulièrement dans les 2 ministères dans lesquels nous sommes maintenant. Et je crois que nous avons les mêmes cibles. C'est de réduire les gaz à effet de serre et atteindre le cible de net zéro, mais dans une manière qui produit une économie forte. Et bien sûr, je vais travailler avec les industries dans l'ouest du Canada, mais je dois travailler partout le Canada et je suis très content de travailler avec M. Gilbeau.
Thank you, Ministers. This is all the time we have with us today. All right, we'll start with Mike 1.
Mackenzie Gray from CTV News. Minister Sajjan, my first question is for you. Do you think your removal as defense minister is admission that the government has not been able to properly handle the issue of sexual misconduct in the military?
First of all, when our government came into power, one of the most important things that we did was we wanted to make sure that we looked after the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces and their families. And this is why we brought in a defense policy that put them first. And in chapter number 1 of our defense policy, it puts them first. We know that there's a lot more work to do, but we're very proud of the work that has been started. And I know that with the tremendous leadership under Minister Nund, she's going to be able to continue that work.
My follow-up question is for Minister Haidu, actually. Minister, I know you're new in the file, and we've already heard from a number of other ministers that they don't know some questions, but you've got a big decision coming up, or at least part of a big decision on Friday, as to whether the federal government can continue with the appeal in the child welfare case with First Nations kids. Why is the government not come out and made a clear decision when reconciliation is a key key issue that the Prime Minister's brought forward, and that it is unanimous across the board from every First Nation and major leaders that the government should not appeal this case?
Well, first of all, let me just say what a joy it is to be here today with you on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. And I do want to thank Minister Miller for handling this file prior to me being appointed today. And I do think that we all agree that litigation isn't serving Indigenous children, but there are many important conversations to be had, and we'll be having them very quickly. I will say that, as the Prime Minister has said, that compensation is important, but ensuring that Indigenous children have equity in services and opportunities like every other child across this country is extremely important as well. And I'll be looking forward to doing that work with my colleagues.
Thank you. Micro numéro 2.
Oui, bonjour pour Madame Joly. Bonjour, Madame Joly. Il y a beaucoup de gens qui pensent que vous êtes la grande gagnante de la journée aujourd'hui. Alors, j'aimerais que vous m'expliquiez comment ça se fait que vous avez fait un saut si haut tout d'un coup.
Mais ça, c'est pas une question que vous devez me poser. C'est plutôt une question qui devrait adresser au Premier ministre. Mais si vous me posez la question à savoir quelle est la vision pour les affaires étrangères, certainement, je vais avoir le plaisir de travailler avec un corps diplomatique parmi les meilleurs au monde, sinon le meilleur au monde. Et je m'inspire beaucoup de ce que Lester P. Pearson a déjà dit, c'est-à-dire que par son pouvoir d'influence très fort, le Canada est capable de jouer au niveau international dans la cour des grands. Et donc, c'est sûr que le monde a changé depuis Lester B. Pearson, mais l'objectif, c'est d'avoir une approche en matière d'affaires étrangères qui va allier humilité et en même temps audace.
Il y avait un gros morceau dont vous avez été débarrassé avant d'arriver, qui était le problème des deux Michael avec la Chine. Donc maintenant, je vois que vous avez déjà réfléchi à votre portfolio avant d'y arriver. C'est quoi le plus grand défi que vous avez, vous croyez, aux affaires étrangères?
Bien, il y en a plusieurs. Puis, je vais encore citer Lester B. Pearson, mais il s'est déjà fait poser la question par un autre journaliste à l'époque. Et à l'époque, il avait répondu, je vais vous dire ça à la fin de l'année. Parce que c'est sûr que c'est un ministère qui tient compte de plusieurs événements partout à travers le monde. Mais je tiens particulièrement à remercier mon collègue Marc Garneau, pour qui j'ai beaucoup d'affection, beaucoup d'amitié. Et très certainement, le remercier pour son travail qu'il a fait sur une panoplie de sujets, mais en particulier pour rapatrier nos deux Michael ici au pays. Et je tiens à remercier l'ambassadeur Barton et toute l'équipe qui a travaillé sur cette question, parce que, bien sincèrement, c'était extrêmement important de rapatrier ces deux personnes. Merci.
Thank you. We'll go back to mic 1.
Hello, Maina Karaman-Williams, the Globe and Mail. My first question is for Minister Sajjan. You're no longer the Minister of National Defense, so I'm wondering, looking back now at your time in that ministry, is there anything that you wish you'd done differently?
Thank you very much for the question. I think there isn't a position that I've held left where you're fully content with it. And but one of the things I want to say is the greatest honor for me, somebody who served as a private in the Army Reserve, started as a private, when it became to command a regiment, and then have the absolute honor to serve as Minister of National Defense. It's one of the things that was very important to me, and I know from our government, is to put the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces first, and especially their families. They sacrifice for us every single day, whether it's on training exercises, and we've seen the tragedies that the sacrifice that they've made from that, or on operations. And right now, the Canadian Armed Forces are serving Canadians, whether some vaccine supporting Saskatchewan, Alberta in the pandemic, and even most recently in Afghanistan. And as we work towards getting that culture change, we wish that we can have it overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, but the steady work that needs to continue and the focus on it, our government has been absolutely committed to it. And I know that with the tremendous leadership under Minister Anand, that work will continue in the service of our women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you. And my next question is for Minister Joly. As you get started on your work as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is a big portfolio, do you have one or two key specific things that will be your priorities, particularly with the G20 in mind?
Well, obviously, the G20 is important, and lots has happened over the past couple months, including making sure that we're getting out of the pandemic, that we embrace this important economic recovery, and fighting climate change and social inclusion. That being said, this is my first day. I've been just sworn in. And I would like to suggest that Lester B. Pearson once said that Canada is able to play such a big role on the international stage because it punches over its weight. And of course, the world has changed since Lester B. Pearson, but the vision that we will have at Global Affairs is one that takes into account that very strategic work that Canada is doing across the world, and it will be a mix of humility and audacity. Thank you.
We'll go back to mic 2.
Minister Sajjan, Ashley Burke, CBC News. What do you see as your legacy during your time in office as the Minister of Defense, and has that somehow been overshadowed by the sexual misconduct crisis?
First of all, as I said, it has been a tremendous honor for me to be in this role. And just to be in cabinet is a privilege unto its own. But for anybody who has served in uniform, to go on and become a Minister of Defense and to serve the women and men is a greatest honor. And regardless of what the difficulties, the challenges that we see in the Canadian Armed Forces, this is not about my legacy. This is about serving the women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces who do extraordinary things for us every single day. Some get reported that we can, but most don't. And I wish I could share those things. And this is why it was so important for me when I was coming in as Minister of Defense, of making sure that we create an environment so that anybody who joined the Canadian Armed Forces, that they can reach their full potential. Because ultimately, our Canadian Armed Forces benefits, our allies benefit, and the world benefits as well. And you see that every single day. In terms of the, probably one of the biggest things that we did in defense very early on was a fully costed and funded defense policy so that the military can actually plan for the future for 20 years out. A 70% increase in defense investment, every service, including the special forces, being re-equipped. But more importantly, as we talk about procurement, probably one of the biggest things for us was putting our members first and their families. Like relocation. It is so difficult when families have to relocate. And the reason I'm sharing some of those, the smaller things that don't make it out into the media is because it matters to people. We deploy our troops all over the world. We're proud to say that every international operation, our troops, when they deploy, it'll be tax-free for them. That says a thank you for all the people that they're leaving behind. So that culture change that we have been working on from day one, shedding a light onto the problem, because until you shed a light, you can't figure out exactly what needs to happen. And so I'm very proud of the work that has begun. And I know that the work can never, we wish it could finish, but as I stated, under the tremendous leadership of Minister Anand, who has tremendous professional experience to bring to this table, I know that work is going to continue in a much faster way.
And Minister Hajdu, my next question's for you. After being the health minister, how do you see this new role? Do you see it more as a lateral move, or a demotion, given your prominent role during the pandemic? And how do you feel about this new file?
First I should start with saying that I have 12 First Nations in my own riding, and I have worked extensively with Indigenous people throughout my previous career, prior to politics, and certainly as a politician had the opportunity to work on the early consultations on the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry, increasing Indigenous skills and education training funding so that it was equitable with non-Indigenous skills training funding. And so I consider this a huge honor to serve Indigenous people of our country and to work with Indigenous communities from across this country. I think it's a critical role in our government's efforts to further reconciliation. And I'm just thrilled to be able to serve my country and Indigenous people in this way. Thank you.
We'll take one last question at mic 1.
Oui. Bonjour, Marco Bélair-Cyrano du Devoir. Mes questions s'adressent à la ministre des Affaires étrangères. Madame Joly, la Chine subira-t-elle des représailles du Canada pour avoir enlevé et détenu 2 Canadiens pendant près de 3 ans?
Bien, écoutez, au niveau de la question liée à la Chine et aux 2 Michael, il va de soi que, comme je l'ai mentionné tantôt, je remercie toute l'équipe qui a fait en sorte de rendre possible ce rapatriement de ces 2 hommes extrêmement importants, 2 Canadiens qui ont trop longtemps resté en Chine. Je tiens à remercier Marc Garneau, bien entendu, mais également l'ambassadeur Barton et toute l'équipe, parce que c'était certainement une priorité au cours des 2 dernières années. J'aurai l'occasion de rencontrer les meilleurs experts dans le monde sur la question de la Chine, particulièrement d'une perspective canadienne, parce que j'aurai l'occasion de rencontrer les diplomates canadiens sous peu. Mais ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que nos yeux sont grands ouverts sur la question de la Chine et nous n'avons aucune illusion.
Eh bien, vous pouvez rester au lutrin. Votre prédécesseur, Marc Garneau, ferait-il un bon ambassadeur du Canada à Paris?
Je tiens à vous dire que Marc est bon dans tout. Donc, Marc Garneau est un bon ami, un collègue député de Montréal, que je connais depuis très longtemps. C'est toujours été un honneur d'être à ses côtés, surtout en tant que première astronaute du Canada. Et puis, ça me fait plaisir de continuer de siéger avec lui au sein du caucus du Québec et du caucus national.
Merci. C'est tout le temps qu'on a avec les ministres ici. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Starting with mic 2 here.
Hi, it's David Reevely from The Logic, and I have 2 questions for Minister Champagne. The first one is about consumer privacy legislation. Your government's last attempt at updating the old law stalled in the House. Will you be reworking that legislation in response to some of the complaints that it's a step back from the 20-year-old law that we have now?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm very pleased, like all of my colleagues, that the Prime Minister has asked us to serve in our respective capacities. Obviously, consumer protection is top of mind as competition in this country. As we have this new mandate, we'll be looking at all the appropriate measures we can put in place. But certainly, we have seen trends, we have seen developments that requires me and my team, obviously, to look at these issues. And you can count on us to focus on consumer, on competition, on making sure that within our countries, we have the set of rules and the enforcements that goes with it in order to protect adequately, I would say, consumers across our nation.
So will there be another bill?
You would probably expect that 5 hours or so after being sworn in, it would be a bit quick for any minister to pretend that new legislation would be brought forward. But one thing I can say to Canadians who are watching is that it is the role of this government, and any government, I would say, to make sure that we always have the right framework for competition and the right framework to protect consumers. And that's certainly going to be top of mind as we look forward in the coming months. Merci.
Merci. Micro numéro 1.
Bonjour, Boris Proulx du Devoir. C'est toujours pour vous, M. Champagne, ma question. Vous avez été ministre des Affaires étrangères. On a une nouvelle ministre des Affaires étrangères aujourd'hui. Quel conseil donneriez-vous à Mme Joly pour demeurer en poste sur le long terme?
Écoutez, je ne pense pas que j'ai des conseils à donner à Mme Joly. Je pense que le travail du ministre des Affaires étrangères est un travail important. La voix du Canada résonne à travers le monde. Moi, je l'ai vécu lorsque j'étais ministre des Affaires étrangères. Le ministre Garneau aussi. La ministre Joly, évidemment, sera la voix du Canada dans le monde. Et on sera toujours là, évidemment, comme collègue pour l'appuyer dans ce rôle-là. Moi, je pense qu'à un moment aussi critique, alors qu'on fait face encore à des enjeux de COVID-19, alors qu'il y a quand même des enjeux économiques dans plusieurs parties du monde, d'avoir une voix forte comme ça pour le Canada à travers le monde, je pense que c'est dans l'intérêt certainement du Canada. Et je suis sûr que Mme Joly saura porter la voix haute et forte du Canada à toutes les tribunes où le Canada, évidemment, fait partie. C'est important. Moi, j'ai toujours dit d'avoir une voix forte. Et on l'a vu dans les dernières semaines, dans les derniers mois, que la coopération internationale était essentielle pour faire face aux grands enjeux qu'on vit. Hein, il y a deux grands enjeux qui nous intéressent. D'abord, il y a la COVID-19 et l'autre, c'est les changements climatiques. Il y a COP26 qui s'en vient. Alors, la voix du Canada se fera entendre et je pense que le monde est aussi intéressé à voir le Canada avoir un rôle de leadership sur la scène internationale.
Merci. Ma question de relance est pour Mme Leboutillier. Vous êtes de nouveau ministre du Revenu national. Vous avez parlé de fermer la trappe aux échappatoires fiscales, aux paradis fiscaux et ce genre de choses. Gouvernement après gouvernement, on voit que la trappe est encore ouverte. Ça prendrait combien de temps selon vous?
Écoutez, puis vous avez entièrement raison. C'est important de continuer de travailler sur tout ce qui touche les échappatoires fiscaux. C'est important de travailler avec aussi la ministre des Finances pour avoir des règles qui vont permettre à l'agence de pouvoir continuer son travail puis de faire en sorte là, qu'on resserre les mailles du filet là, pour ceux qui mettent en place des stratagèmes puis qui font en sorte là, que les gens ne payent pas leur juste part.
Thank you. Back to Mike 2.
Hi, Tessie Sanchi. I cover health for Hill Times Publishing. My question is for Minister Champagne. Minister, when you launched the biomanufacturing strategy in July, you told the pharmaceutical sector that you've heard them. They have their issues with pharmaceutical regulation in this country. And you also said that you and the health minister would engage in discussions. Now that you are returning to the file, what can you tell the sector about those discussions? Will formal consultations take place?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the question. I think you were right. One of the first things we did as we saw the COVID pandemic, you saw in March 2020, when it was declared a pandemic, we invested close to $1 billion to rebuild the biomanufacturing sector in the country because we understood and Canadians have asked us to be more resilient. Actually, what we saw in Canada and what we saw in many Western countries is that we really need to onshore productions of a lot of essential goods. I often said that you saw supply chain going from global to regional, and more emphasis put on resiliency than efficiency. So we did invest, and you saw some key investment. We were able to attract Moderna in our country to have mRNA capacity in the country. Actually, we have Medicago in Quebec City. We saw Sanofi investing. And I will continue to make sure that we onshore as much as possible of the biomanufacturing capacity in the country. I've been talking to about almost all CEOs in the country which want to increase production in Canada. Certainly that work will continue with Minister Duclos, because one thing that we have learned from this pandemic is that we need to look forward and be better prepared whatever may come next. That's what Canadians expect. That's what we are committed to do. And that's what we have already started to do because we have been able to attract some key investments that will make Canada more resilient in the future.
My second question is also for you. Going back to those discussions, one of the sector's major complaint, one of them is drug pricing regulations. I do understand it's a Health Canada file. However, you want to encourage companies to set up shop in Canada. Do you plan on engaging in those discussions on the PMPRB regulations?
Well, I'm always wanting to engage with CEO. Actually, that's part of the reason why we've been able to land that number of investments. I mean, we said from the get-go that we had seen manufacturing leaving the country over the last 3-4 decades, and in a matter of months, we have been able to rebuild significant capacity in the country. And certainly we'll be continuing to engage with CEOs and leaders in the industry. And I've always said my door is open because we want to make sure that we work collaboratively with the industry. We know that the health sciences and life sciences industry is one where you have a lot of science, innovation, and technology. And we want Canada to be at the forefront, and we want Canada to be leading in the world, to continue to be attracting. We have the talent, we have the ecosystem, we have the research ecosystem in Canada to attract. I think we have become a very attractive jurisdiction, and I'll be happy to engage with them to see what more we can do to attract more investment, create jobs in this country, and make Canada more resilient to face whatever may come next.
Thank you. We'll go back to Mike 1.
Hi, Chris Rand, CBC. Two quick ones for Mr. Holland, if you would. Come on down. The first one is Parliament comes back November 22nd. We've got till December 17th before the winter break. Do you see that your government can put forward some COVID legislation and move it through to the Senate in a 3-week period?
Well, it's premature to talk what exactly is going to be part of the agenda. Let me say that I am a firm believer in cooperation, that my first move is going to be to talk with my counterparts in other parties to say that there are clear and pressing priorities, and certainly, as you mentioned, ending COVID-19 and making sure that we do everything together to do that, to get it done. So I can't say exactly what that's going to entail because there's a lot of discussions that have to happen. We're at day 0 right now, but obviously this is going to be a top priority.
And my follow-up is there's an unknown amount of the Conservative caucus who are unvaccinated or won't declare the vaccination status, and there's that one Liberal MP who has the medical issue who's not fully vaccinated. So how do you see Parliament returning? Do you see at this point a virtual mixed thing, or do you see it as being only the people who are double vaccinated can come and attend Parliament?
Well, there's two issues there. So let's take the first issue, which is vaccinations. I think Canadians were preeminently clear that they have an expectation that workplaces be vaccinated. You know, if we just walk down the street here and try to go to a restaurant, we've got to be vaccinated. Let's remember with the Conservatives, they were against a hybrid model in the beginning, and then they became for it. They were against digital voting, then they were for it. This is a preeminently reasonable thing. I've really been impressed at the Board of Internal Economy, the body which governs these matters, how we've been able in COVID to put aside some of these more partisan concerns and really focus on public health and make good decisions. So this is so preeminently reasonable that I think at the end of the day, that's going to prevail. Let me secondly say that I think a hybrid parliament has been incredibly effective, and that as we don't know how this is going to go, and we still need to maintain that flexibility as we have members who are unvaccinated, that we're going to still need those provisions over the near term, and I look forward to having conversations with my counterparts in that regard.
My question is also for you, Minister Holland. Before this election campaign, the Prime Minister said that Parliament was becoming toxic, that it was dysfunctional. After the election, really not much has changed. A lot of the same members of Parliament were re-elected. How are you going to approach negotiations and compromises with opposition parties who were frustrated that your government took them into an election? And how are you going to get them on side with your agenda, given that it is crucial to have them, otherwise we're at risk of going to another election again?
Well, thank you for the question. Look, I spent a long time in opposition as a critic, and I welcome criticism. I think it's an essential part of our democracy. But that criticism needs to be constructive. And we do need to tone down the partisan nature of the aggression that we have seen. Look, it's clear Canadians have big expectations of this Parliament. They have clear things that they're looking for us to achieve, from ending COVID-19 to climate change, to affordable housing, to reconciliation of Indigenous issues. So there's so many different things that we have to come together on. I think that we all have to meet that with a spirit of cooperation and being constructive. And so that's what I'm looking forward to in my discussions as we talk about the path ahead, about working in that spirit.
Si vous pouvez rester là en français, elle m'a donné sa deuxième question. J'essaie de comprendre, vous dites qu'éventuellement, les conservateurs vont entendre raison sur la vaccination, mais en ce moment, ils refusent la décision du bureau de régie interne. Ils veulent que tout le monde siège en personne. Alors, vous entrevoyez comment le retour du 22 novembre avec des députés qui ne sont pas vaccinés et qui réclament leur droit d'entrée quand même?
Écoute, au début, les whips des partis conservateurs a dit clairement que le Parti conservateur va respecter le choix de régie interne. Et après ça, il y a un changement. Et avec le chef d'opposition, Aaron O'Toole, Aaron a dit la même chose, que c'est important de respecter le choix de régie interne. Et maintenant, il y a une autre chose. J'espère que, parce que c'est vraiment clair pour la sécurité publique, que c'est essentiel d'être vacciné. C'est absolument essentiel. Quand je suis allé au restaurant, c'est essentiel d'être vacciné. Et il y a des mêmes attentes pour les chambres de communes. Je pense que ça, c'est l'attente des Canadiennes, et j'espère que le Parti conservateur va être raisonnable sur ça.
Thank you. This is all the time we have for the new group of ministers. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.